It was a Tuesday night in January, deep in the hills of Harlan County, West Virginia. The temperature had dropped to 9 degrees. A 78-year-old man named Ray Dawson sat alone in his kitchen, listening to the wind press against the walls of his house. Two German shepherds appeared on his porch. Their necks were rubbed raw, and they were shaking so hard their claws scraped the boards in a rhythm he could hear through the door. Ray brought them inside, laid them by the wood stove, and wrapped horse blankets around their bodies. By 6 the next morning, 7 sheriff's vehicles blocked the only road to his property. Officers stood in his yard with rifles. A deputy pounded on his door and told him not to move. Ray hadn't called anyone. He hadn't told a soul about the dogs, but someone knew they were there. And what those dogs carried around their necks was about to tear open a secret this county had buried for 11 years. What happened inside that house over the next 48 hours will stay with you long after this story ends. Ray Dawson had lived on that hillside for 23 years. Before that, he spent 26 years in the United States Army, 2 tours in Vietnam, 1 in the Gulf. He came home in '91 with a Purple Heart, a busted left knee, and a silence that never quite lifted. His wife, Carol, passed in 2001, pancreatic cancer, 14 weeks from diagnosis to the end. After the funeral, Ray stopped going into town. He had the house, a wood-burning stove, a well, and a generator that ran on diesel. He drove his pickup to the general store once every 2 weeks for canned goods, coffee, and lamp oil. That was his contact with the world. He didn't own a phone. He didn't have a television. The radio on the kitchen counter picked up one AM station out of Charleston, and most nights he turned it off before 8. If you've ever known a man who came back from war and just went quiet, not angry, not broken, just done talking, you already know Ray Dawson. The nearest neighbor was a woman named Bess Calloway, 71, who lived 4 miles down the gravel road. She checked on him every Sunday, left a jar of preserves on his porch rail, and never stayed longer than 10 minutes. That was the arrangement. It had worked for years. The house itself sat at the end of a logging road that hadn't been maintained since the '80s. In winter, the last mile was impassable without chains. The county plow didn't come out that far. Ray kept a shovel by the door and a 50-pound bag of rock salt under the porch. That was his snow plan. He had no dogs. He hadn't kept an animal since Carol died. She had loved dogs. He had loved them because she did. After she was gone, the silence where a dog would have been was just another silence he learned to live with. That Tuesday night, the blizzard came in faster than the AM station predicted. By 9 o'clock, the wind was steady at 40 miles an hour. Snow fell sideways. The wood stove struggled. Ray fed at oak splits every 30 minutes and sat in his chair with a wool coat buttoned to his chin. He heard the sound at 11:14. He knew the time because he looked at the clock on the mantel the moment he heard it. A scratching, low and desperate. Not a branch, not the wind catching a shutter. Something alive was clawing at his front door. Thank you for being here. Please subscribe and like this video. And before we continue, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments. I love knowing who's out there listening. Ray didn't open doors at night without thinking about it first. That was a rule he'd carried since Quezon. He stood in the hallway for a full minute, listening. The scratching came again, lower this time, weaker. Then a sound underneath it, a whine, high and thin, like air leaking from a tire. He pulled the curtain on the side window. The porch light had burned out 2 weeks ago, and he hadn't replaced the bulb. Moonlight was useless in the blizzard. He saw shapes, 2 of them, dark against the snow. They weren't standing, they were lying flat, pressed against the base of the door. Ray unbolted the lock and opened the door 6 inches. The wind hit him like a wall, and then he saw them. 2 German shepherds, full grown, maybe 80 pounds each, though they looked smaller because they were curled tight. Their coats were matted with ice. Their eyes reflected the hall light, wide, desperate, not wild. These were not feral dogs. They held still when the door opened. They didn't lunge. They didn't run. They waited. The larger one had an old wound across the top of its head, partially healed and crusted over. The smaller one had deep marks around its neck where something heavy had worn through the fur and into the skin beneath. Ray's hands stopped moving for a moment. He stood in the doorway with the wind cutting through his coat and looked at those marks. He knew what restraint injuries looked like. He'd seen them on men who had been held against their will. He didn't say a word. He stepped back, opened the door wide, and both dogs dragged themselves across the threshold. They left dark stains on the pine floorboards. The smaller one collapsed the moment it cleared the doorframe. The bigger one stood over it, legs shaking, and looked up at Ray. That look. Ray would remember it for the rest of his life, not begging, not fearful, reporting like a soldier who'd made it back to the line and was waiting to tell someone what happened out there. Ray shut the door against the storm. He brought the horse blankets from the closet. He heated water on the stove and cleaned the marks with iodine he kept in the first aid box. The smaller dog flinched but didn't snap. The bigger one watched every move Ray made but never growled. Around the neck of each dog hung a collar. Not a pet collar. These were heavy-gauge nylon, institutional, the kind used in municipal kennels. On each collar was a metal tag stamped with a number. No name, no address, just a 6-digit number and 2 letters. HC, HC Harlan County. Ray turned the tag over in his fingers. County animal control tags. He'd seen them before years ago on strays the county picked up along the highway. But these dogs weren't strays. They were German shepherds in working condition, muscled, trained, responsive to hand signals. Dogs like this didn't wander. Dogs like this were taken. He set the tags down and looked at the dogs. The bigger one had settled beside the stove, eyes half closed, one ear still cocked toward the door. The smaller one hadn't moved from where it collapsed. Its breathing was shallow but steady. Ray added another split to the fire. He pulled his chair closer to the stove and sat down. Outside, the blizzard screamed. Inside, the only sounds were the hiss of burning oak and the slow, ragged breathing of 2 animals that had come from somewhere they shouldn't have been able to leave. He didn't sleep. He sat in that chair until dawn, watching the door. The bigger dog watched it too. Something was wrong, and both of them knew it. The first light came gray and flat through the frost on the windows. The blizzard had slowed, but not stopped. Snow was piled 3 feet against the north side of the house. The driveway was gone. Ray checked the dogs. The smaller one had moved during the night, crawling closer to the stove. Its eyes were open now, tracking Ray as he crossed the room. The bigger one stood the moment Ray stood. It followed him to the kitchen. It followed him to the woodpile by the back door. When Ray stopped, it stopped. When Ray moved, it moved. Half a step behind, always on his left side. Ray had worked with military dogs. He recognized the behavior. This animal had been trained. Heel position, alert stance. It wasn't guessing. It was doing what it had been taught to do. He poured water into a bowl and set it on the floor. The bigger dog drank without breaking eye contact with the hallway. The smaller one crawled to the bowl and drank slowly, its neck stiff with pain. The collar shifted as it lowered its head, and Ray could see the dark, discolored skin underneath where something had pressed too hard for too long. Ray knelt and unbuckled the collar. Underneath, the skin was worn through in a perfect ring, not from a collar that was too tight, from a chain. A logging chain, maybe, or a tow chain. Something heavy, something that had no business being around any animal's neck. He set the collar on the kitchen table and looked at the tag again. HC-041917. The second dog's tag read HC-041918. Sequential numbers. These dogs had been processed together, taken in together, logged on the same day. Ray opened the cabinet above the stove where he kept Carol's old address book. Inside the front cover, she'd written the number for the county offices. He didn't have a phone in the house, but Bess Calloway did. Bess was 4 miles away. In this snow, that might as well be 40. He tried the radio, static. The AM station out of Charleston was down, probably the tower, probably the ice. He turned the dial and got nothing but white noise across every frequency. He was cut off, no phone, no radio, no road. 2 injured dogs with county tags. And whatever they had run from was still out there in those woods. At 8:45, the bigger dog did something Ray couldn't explain. It walked to the front door, sat down and stared at the bottom hinge. Not the door, not the handle, the hinge. It sat there for 6 minutes without moving. Then it stood, walked to the window beside the door, and pressed its nose against the glass. A low sound came from its throat. Not a growl, not a whine. Something between the two. A warning that hadn't decided what it was warning about. Ray moved to the window. The snow had drifted across the porch, smooth and unbroken except for the trail the dogs had dragged through the night before. But beyond the porch, at the edge of where the yard met the tree line, something was different. Tracks. Not animal tracks. Boot prints. A single set coming from the northeast, stopping at the edge of the property, then turning back into the woods. The snow had partially filled them, which meant they were hours old. Sometime during the night, while Ray sat by the stove watching the door, someone had walked to the edge of his yard, stood there, and left. The bigger dog pressed harder against the glass. The smaller one, still lying by the stove, lifted its head and let out one sharp bark. Just one. Then silence. Ray went to the bedroom closet. He hadn't opened the gun safe in 4 years. The combination was Carol's birthday. He turned the dial, took out the Remington 12 gauge, loaded it, set it against the wall by the front door. Then he sat back down and waited. At 10:17, he heard an engine. Not a car engine, heavier. A diesel grinding through snow. It was distant at first, then closer, then it stopped. Doors opened, more than one. He counted the slams, 4 doors. The bigger dog was already on its feet, pressed against the wall beside the window, every muscle tight. Its ears rotated forward and locked. The smaller dog tried to stand, failed, tried again, and managed to get to its feet. It limped to Ray's side and leaned against his leg. Through the frosted glass, Ray saw them. 3 white SUVs with county markings pushing through the drifts on the logging road. Behind them, a dark sedan. The vehicle stopped 100 yards from the house. Men got out, 6 of them. 2 wore county work jackets. The others wore plain clothes. One of the plainclothes men was big, 6'3", maybe 6'4", heavy through the shoulders. He walked ahead of the others, not toward the house, but toward the tree line where the boot prints had been. He crouched, looked at the snow, then stood and pointed at Ray's front door. Ray's chest tightened. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew the look of men who had come for something specific, and he knew the look of a boy that recognized a threat it had met before. The bigger dog saw the big man through the window, and it did something Ray had never seen a dog do in 60 years of living. It stepped backward, away from the glass. It lowered its body flat to the floor, and it placed one paw over its own muzzle. It was hiding. A knock came at the door, hard, official. "Mr. Dawson, Harlan County Sheriff's Department. Open the door, please." Ray looked at the dog on the floor. He looked at the smaller dog leaning against his leg, trembling. He looked at the shotgun against the wall. He didn't touch the gun. He walked to the door and opened it. The tall deputy stood on the porch, snow on his shoulders, badge visible under an open coat. Behind him, 4 other men fanned across the yard. The big man in plain clothes stood by the tree line, watching, not approaching. "Mr. Dawson, I'm Deputy Warren Cole with the Harlan County Sheriff's Office. We have reports of 2 dogs missing from the county animal control facility. We have reason to believe they may be on your property." Ray didn't move. "They're inside." "Sir, we need to recover those animals. They're county property." "County property," Ray repeated. He said it flat, like he was reading a word off a wall and deciding whether he believed it. "That's correct, sir. We'll need to come inside and—" "The dogs are hurt," Ray said. "Both of them. One has marks around its neck that go down to bare skin. The other has a wound on its head that somebody put there. You want to tell me how county property ends up on a man's porch at 11 o'clock at night in a blizzard? Looking like that?" Deputy Cole's expression didn't change, but his eyes moved. Just for a half second, they moved to the big man standing by the trees. Then they came back. "Sir, I understand your concern, but these animals are under county jurisdiction. We're authorized to remove them." "Who's he, Ray?" "He?" Ray asked. He nodded toward the big man. Cole didn't answer immediately. "That's Mr. Greer. He oversees the county animal program. He's not law enforcement. No, sir. Then he stays off my property. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Ray counted them. Cole shifted his weight from one boot to the other. Mr. Dawson, we can do this easy or we can get a court order. Either way, those dogs go back to the facility. Ray looked at Cole. He looked past Cole at the men in the yard. He looked at Greer, standing by the trees, hands in his pockets, face blank. Come back with the court order, Ray said, and he closed the door. He stood with his back against it. The bigger dog was still flat on the floor, paw over its muzzle. The smaller one pressed harder against his leg. Outside, boots crunched in the snow. Engines started. Doors slammed. The vehicles pulled away, grinding back down the logging road until the sound disappeared into the wind. Ray locked the door. He checked the back door. He checked every window. Then he sat down, put his hand on the bigger dog's head, and said the first full sentence he'd spoken to another living thing in 3 months. I don't know what they did to you, but they're not getting you back. The dog lifted its paw from its muzzle. It looked at Ray, and for the first time since it crawled through his door, its tail moved once. Just once. Ray needed to get to a phone. Bess Calloway's house was 4 miles south. In 3 feet of snow with a bad knee, that was a 2-hour walk. Maybe 3. But Ray had walked worse in worse conditions. He'd done it when people were shooting at him. He wrapped the smaller dog's neck with clean gauze from the first aid kit, careful and slow, the way a medic wraps a field dressing. He left water and the last of the canned beef in bowls by the stove. He loaded the Remington and set it inside the closet by the front door, safety on. Then he put on his heaviest coat, his boots, his gloves, and he walked out the back door into the snow. The bigger dog tried to follow. It stood at the back door and barked once. Ray looked at it. Stay, he said. The dog sat. It didn't move from that spot until he came back. The walk took 2 hours and 40 minutes. By the time he reached Bess Calloway's porch, his knee was swollen to twice its size, and he couldn't feel his fingers. Bess opened the door before he knocked. She'd seen him coming through the window. Raymond Dawson, you've lost your mind. I need your phone. You need a hospital. Phone first. She let him in. He sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee he didn't drink and picked up the receiver. He didn't call the sheriff's department. He called the West Virginia State Police Barracks in Beckley. He asked for the Criminal Investigations Unit. The trooper who answered was named Holt. Ray told him about the cheese. He told him about the county tags. He told him about the marks on their necks, the wound on the bigger dog's head, the sequential numbers. He told him about Greer standing by the tree line. He told him about the deputy's eyes moving to Greer before answering a question. Trooper Holt listened without interrupting. When Ray finished, there was a pause. Mr. Dawson, how long were you in the Army? 26 years. You handled military working dogs? I worked alongside them. I know what a trained dog looks like. And I know what a mistreated one looks like. These two are both. Another pause. Then Holt said something that changed everything. Mr. Dawson, we've had an open investigation into the Harlan County Animal Control Facility for 7 months. A tipster reported that dogs logged as euthanized were actually being sold. We couldn't confirm it. We couldn't get close enough. The facility is run by a man named Dale Greer. Ray's grip tightened on the receiver. The dogs you're describing match a pattern we've been tracking. German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, working breeds. They get seized or surrendered. They get logged. Then they disappear from the records. Officially, they're put down, but the euthanasia numbers don't match the drug orders. Someone's cooking the books. Where are the dogs going? Ray asked. We believe they're being sold to people who use them in ways I don't need to describe to you over the phone. We haven't been able to prove it because we haven't recovered any of the animals alive. The line went quiet for a moment. Until now, Holt said. Ray looked at Bess. She was standing by the stove, hands folded, listening to every word. Those dogs got away from him, Ray said. They ran through a blizzard with injuries that should have stopped them, and they found the first door they could get to. And you let them in. Yes. Mr. Dawson, I need you to do something for me. I need you to go back to your house. I need you to keep those dogs safe. Do not let anyone remove them. Not the county, not the sheriff, not Greer. Can you do that? I've been doing it since last night. We'll be there by morning. I'm sending a team. State police. No county involvement. This is our case now. Ray hung up the phone. He sat at Bess's table for 5 minutes without speaking. His knee throbbed. His hands ached. Bess set a fresh cup of coffee in front of him. This time he drank it. Raymond, she said, what have you gotten yourself into? Something I should have gotten into a long time ago. He walked back. 2 hours and 51 minutes. The snow was deeper now. Twice he fell. The second time, he stayed down for a full minute, facing the snow, knee screaming. He thought about not getting up. Then he thought about the dog pressing its paw over its own muzzle, hiding from a man it recognized, a man who had heard it. Ray got up. He kept walking. When he came through the back door, the bigger dog was still sitting where he'd left it. It hadn't moved. The smaller one had crawled from the stove to the back door, as close as it could get to where Ray had gone. When it saw him, it let out a sound. Not a bark, not a whine. A low, broken noise from deep in its chest that Ray felt more than heard. He locked the door. He checked the windows. He sat in his chair with the boss on either side of him, and he waited for morning. It came at 6:42. Not sunrise, the sound of engines. Different engines this time. Heavier. State police cruisers, 4 of them, in a white forensic van. They came up the logging road in a line, chains biting through the drifts. Trooper Holt was the first one out. Tall, lean, mid-40s, wearing a state police parka and carrying a folder. He walked to Ray's porch and stopped at the bottom step. Mr. Dawson? That's me. I'm Trooper First Class David Holt. We spoke on the phone. May I come inside? Ray opened the door. Holt stepped in and stopped when he saw the dogs. The bigger one stood between Ray and the trooper. Not aggressive, but present, alert. The smaller one lifted its head from the floor and watched. Holt crouched slowly. He looked at the marks on the smaller dog's neck. He looked at the collar tags on the kitchen table. He picked one up and turned it over. HC-041917, he read. He opened his folder and ran his finger down a printed list. His finger stopped. He looked up at Ray. This dog was logged as euthanized on November 3rd, signed off by Dale Greer. That dog is standing right in front of you, Ray said. Yes, sir, it is. Holt stood and spoke into his radio. Confirmed positive identification on both animals. Tags matched the facility records. Both listed as destroyed, both alive. Initiate warrant execution on the Harlan County Animal Control Facility. Arrest warrant for Dale Edward Greer. Charges: fraud, animal cruelty, conspiracy, evidence tampering. Move now. The radio crackled back. Copy. Teams en route. Holt turned to Ray. Mr. Dawson, these dogs are now evidence in a state criminal investigation. I need them examined by our veterinary forensic team. They'll be treated, documented, and kept safe. You have my word. Ray looked at the bug. The bigger one looked back at him. Its tail moved again, twice this time. I want to be there when they're examined, Ray said. That can be arranged. And I want to know what happens to Greer. Holt nodded. You'll know. The forensic team came inside. They photographed the injuries. They swabbed the collars for trace evidence. They took samples from both dogs. The veterinarian, a woman named Dr. Patel, examined the marks on the smaller dog's neck and went quiet for a long time. These marks are at least 4 weeks old, she said. Repeated restraint with something heavy. The scarring underneath tells me this wasn't once. This was ongoing. This dog was held, released, held again. Over and over. She looked at the bigger dog's head. This wound is newer, maybe 48 hours. Something hit this animal hard enough to break the skin, but it healed partially on its own, which tells me no one treated it. Ray stood by the window and listened. His hands were steady. His face was still, but his jaw worked back and forth the way it did when he was holding something down that wanted to come up. If you've ever stood in a room and listened to someone describe what was done to a creature that couldn't speak for itself, you know exactly what Ray was holding down. At 9:15, Holt's radio came alive. Facility secured. Greer in custody. We've got records, hundreds of them. Dogs listed as destroyed, no bodies, no disposal receipts. Cash deposits in a personal account matching dates of supposed disposals. And Trooper, we found a kennel building behind the main facility, hidden behind a tree line, no road access, no signage. 12 dogs inside, all working breeds, all in bad shape. Holt lowered the radio and looked at Ray. 12, Ray said. 12 alive. We don't know how many didn't make it. Ray nodded slowly. He walked to the bigger dog and put his hand on its head. The dog leaned into his palm, its eyes closed. These two got out, Ray said. They got through a fence or a door or whatever was between them in the woods. They ran through a blizzard with injuries that should have dropped them. And they picked my door. Yes, sir. Why my door? Holt didn't answer. Nobody could. The smaller dog crawled across the floor to Ray's boots. It pressed its head against his ankle and stayed there. 11 years. That's how long Greer had been running the operation. 11 years of dogs going in and not coming out. 11 years of forged records, falsified logs, and cash payments from people who took those dogs and used them until there was nothing left to use. 2 dogs ended it. 2 dogs that refused to disappear in a building where they were supposed to be forgotten. The investigation that followed lasted 14 weeks. State police seized more than 800 documents from the Harlan County Animal Control Facility. In the back office, they found a handwritten logbook with dates, breed descriptions, and dollar amounts. At the bottom of the last page was a column of tally marks, 114 of them. Each mark represented a dog that had been sold. 114 animals over 11 years funneled out of a facility that was supposed to protect them. The trial began in May at the Raleigh County Courthouse in Beckley. The judge determined that Harlan County could not guarantee an impartial proceeding. Too many people had known Greer. Too many had looked the other way. Ray Dawson drove to Beckley for the first day. He wore his only suit, the one he'd worn to Carol's funeral. He sat in the third row of the gallery and didn't speak to anyone. The collar tags were entered as evidence that morning. HC-04-1917 and HC-04-1918. 2 dogs that were supposed to be dead. Greer's defense attorney argued administrative errors. He argued overflow from an underfunded facility. He argued that Greer was a dedicated public servant overwhelmed by demands. The prosecution put Dr. Patel on the stand. She spoke for 2 hours about the injuries, the scarring patterns, what specific types of wounds indicate. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Then the prosecution called a witness no one expected. Curtis Webb, 31, from McDowell County. He'd been arrested 3 weeks after Greer. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he agreed to testify. Webb described how the operation worked from the buyer's end. He described making phone calls to a number he'd been given. He described driving to a location outside of Harlan, backing his truck up to a building with no sign on it, and loading dogs into crates. He described paying cash. He described what happened to the dogs after that. The courtroom was silent during his testimony. Ray sat with his hands folded in his lap. His knuckles were white. His face didn't move. When Webb finished, the judge called a recess. Ray stood and walked into the hallway. He stood by a window that looked out at the parking lot and didn't move for 15 minutes. A court officer asked if he was all right. Ray nodded once and went back inside. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Greer received 12 years in state prison. He showed no reaction when the sentence was read. The 12 dogs recovered from the hidden kennel were placed with rescue organizations across the state. 9 survived. 3 did not. Their damage was too severe. They were humanely euthanized by veterinarians who documented everything, who stayed in the room with each animal until the end. Because that is what it looks like when the system works the way it's supposed to. Of the 9 survivors, 7 were eventually adopted. The Belgian Malinois with the crooked leg went to a retired K9 handler in Charleston. He named her Copper. She lived with him for 6 more years. 2 were never adopted. Their behavioral damage was too deep. They lived out their years in a quiet facility with large outdoor runs and handlers who understood that some wounds close on the outside long before they close on the inside, and some never close at all. Ray Dawson drove to the state police barracks in Beckley on a Tuesday in April to pick up two German shepherds, 3 months after the night they had appeared on his porch. Trooper Holt met him with the paperwork. The dogs had been cleared as evidence. The marks on the smaller dog's neck had healed into smooth, pale scars. The wound on the bigger dog's head had closed into a ridge of scar tissue. They were free to go. The bigger one walked out of the barracks and went straight to Ray's truck. Jumped into the bed, turned around once, sat down facing the road. The smaller one followed, slower, careful with each step, sat beside the bigger dog and leaned against its shoulder. Ray signed the papers on the hood of the truck. Holt handed him the pen. A cardinal sat on the fence behind them and called bon once into the morning air. "You ever pick names for them?" Holt asked. Ray looked at the two dogs in the truck bed. The bigger one watched the tree line, scanning. The smaller one watched Ray. "The big one's Ridge," he said. "The little one's 6. 6? She was in Kennel 6 at the facility. That's what they called her. A number, not a name. I'm keeping it so she remembers where she came from, and so I remember why it matters." Holt extended his hand. Ray shook it. One firm grip. No extra words. He drove home. 4 miles of gravel. The logging road was dry now. Wildflowers pushed through the ditches. The snow was gone except for thin white lines in the deepest hollows. Ridge jumped down first. 6 followed, favoring her front left leg. They walked up the porch steps ahead of Ray. Ridge stopped at the front door and waited. 6 sat beside him. Ray opened the door. Both dogs walked in. Ridge went to the spot by the wood stove where he'd collapsed that first night, circled it twice, lay down with his chin on the floorboards. 6 went to the kitchen, lay down by the table in the exact spot where her collar had sat for 3 months. The collar was gone now, stored in an evidence warehouse. But 6 lay there as if the memory was enough. The moment someone knelt down and unbuckled it and didn't look away. Bess Calloway came by that Sunday. She left a jar of preserves on the porch rail the way she always did. But this time she stayed 20 minutes. She sat on the porch step with Ridge at her feet and 6 leaning against her knee. And she didn't say much, and Ray didn't say much, and that was fine. Before she left, she looked at Ray sitting in the doorway with a dog on each side of him, and she said, "Carol would have liked this." Ray didn't answer right away. He looked at Ridge, he looked at 6, he looked at the hills turning green beyond the yard. "Yeah," he said, "she would have." Ridge walked a half step ahead of Ray as they moved through the house that evening, the way he always would from that day forward, the way a dog walks beside someone it has chosen. Not because it was trained to, not because it was told to, because some choices don't require language. They require only the decision to stay. 6 slept by the kitchen table every night. She never moved to the living room. She slept in the spot where someone had knelt down and taken the weight off her neck and not looked away. She slept in the place where things changed. Some doors open because someone knocks. Some doors open because something on the other side already knows who's waiting. And some doors open because a man who stopped talking to the world 20 years ago heard something scratching at the wood and decided that silence had lasted long enough. 2 dogs ended 11 years of cruelty, not because they were brave, and not because they were trained, and not because they understood what they were carrying around their necks. They ended it because they ran toward the only thing that matters when everything else has been taken away. They ran toward a door that might open, and it did.